In my lifetime, all of them have ceased. They've all moved down to closer generations. These ancestral family reunions have stopped. So when I heard that the Clark one was still going, I was delighted, and even more delighted to be invited. So, who am I? So, this is me, I'm Chris, and my dad is J. Grant Stevenson, who's done a lot of genealogy work, and maybe you've heard of some of his stuff. And then his father is Merlin L. Stevenson, and then his father is Joseph Echo Stevenson. Now let me tell you how he got his middle name. So when his father's when Edward was in Echo Canyon defending the church against Johnson's army, he received word that Nancy Rita Porter had given birth to a little boy. And so he said, well, we will name him Joseph Echo, because that I was in Echo Canyon in remembrance of that occasion. So that's where he got that fun little name. Anyway, so that's how I fit. So the Clarks and Stevensons, the connections, Charles is going to go over most of this with you, but just let me give this overview. So there's kind of a double connection that we have, a normal connection of where Ezra had married Mary Stevenson, and then kind of an unusual one where he divorced, where Nancy had divorced Edward Stevenson, and then later married Ezra T. Clark. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Now, when Nancy Rita Porter Stevenson married Ezra T., her youngest child was still at home. That's Joseph Echo. And so he went to live with the Clark family. And he loved, of course, Uncle Uncle Ezra, and that was his uncle. And he loved being there in the family. They had a little bit of a problem, and that was they now had 3 Josephs in the house. And so they had to figure out how they were going to delineate each person. And so there was Big Joe and Little Joe, and Joseph Echo got the nickname Jody. And that nickname actually stuck his whole life. He went by Jode or Jody his whole life. When he was living there in the Clark home, he became best friends with Edward Barrett Clark, who went by, they called each other Eddie and Jody. And they worked together doing the cattle drives for many years during their teenage years. And they would drive the cattle from Farmington up past Bear Lake up to the Georgetown area. And so the cattle would be up there in the summertime, and then in the fall they'd reverse the process and bring them back down to Farmington. And they did that, I don't know how long Eddie did it, but Jody did it for about 5 years. And he turned 17 and he was ready to get out on his own. But he learned a lot from that, and like I said, loved the Clark family. Okay, now I'm going to go up in the next generation, talk about a little bit about Mary Stevenson and Edward Stevenson. They were brothers and sisters. And you can see the lineage there, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of the lineage there with them. But Edward's first wife was Nancy Rita Porter, and he later became a polygamist, as did Ezra and Mary. But so let me focus first on, there's a picture, I think most of you have seen that, nice colorized picture of Ezra T. and Mary. So again, I'm not going to go over these points. Charles is going to cover some of these things, but let me just point out just some of the highlights. She was born in 1825 in Gibraltar. Now Gibraltar is an island just off the coast of Spain. It was a British colony at that time. I think it still is. And they were there because her father, her father, Joseph, was a cooper, which is a barrel maker. And he was working in the military. He was not in the military, he was a civilian working for the military to keep all of the gunpowder barrels in good working order. And that's where Mary was born. Then the other one highlighted in yellow is Ezra P. She got married in 1845, and then Nancy Reed Porter comes into the family in 1870, and then Mary dies in 1911. So I took from Mary's autobiography 3 gems that I thought were important to share. I felt like would be important to share. And so this is the first one. This is pretty significant. Now, I just started listening to the audiobook that just came out called Dreams as Revelation. This is quoted in that book. One of the dreams that's important to modern day individuals. So this happened a year before the church was introduced up into the Pontiac, Michigan area where they lived. So I had a dream of seeing the Savior. He took me in his arms. I can imagine how she would have felt with that. And she wrote this years later. This had such a profound impact on her that she remembered this dream. We sat in a circle. He blessed us and kissed us. It was only the members who accepted the gospel that sat in the circle. So her two older brothers never accepted the gospel, and they were not in that circle. I told Mother my dream. She said it was a good dream and for me to be a good girl. I was about 7 years old. Like I said, it's about a year before the gospel was brought up to Pontiac, Michigan. That was done through, their living in that area was Lucy Mack Smith's brother, as well as Martin Harris's sister lived in that area. And so some missionaries came up there. Lucy Mack Smith had visited up there. Prophet Joseph Smith and 3 witnesses all came together, did a great meeting up there, and that's how the Stevenson family was introduced to the gospel. Then later on, this is an incident she talks about in her autobiography about when they first, after they left Nauvoo on our way to winter quarters. My husband and I and our babe, Ezra James, were in the second wagon company. While crossing the plains one day, I tried to jump out of the wagon while it was moving, but did not jump far enough. These people, they're not used to wagons and ox carts and all that. I'm sure she didn't really understand the danger of doing what she did, but for whatever reason, she did, and she landed under the rear wheel. My husband, Ezra, quick as thought, I suspect it was quicker than thought, grabbed the wheel and held it from rolling over me until my mother could run ahead and stop the lead oxen. I was badly bruised, but took some camphor and soon revived. My husband's face was white as a sheet. You can imagine. What a miraculous experience for her. So the two, for which we're all grateful. And then the last thing I wanted to point out from her autobiography is this entry about going from winter quarters and how she ended up in Farmington. We had spent 2 winters at winter quarters where my second son was born, Timothy Baldwin. We started from there in June 1848 and saw great herds of buffalo and also many Indians, but we were not frightened. It's interesting, they've been through so much already. They've been mobbed, they've been driven from place to place. They've been out in the wilderness now for a couple of winters, about a year and a half, and now they're not frightened anymore. They know the hand of the Lord. They knew that they would be preserved. Let's see, where were we? I had all I could do to take care of my 2 children and cook with buffalo chips. We would stop a day once in a while and cook up all we could and do our washing. For supper, we had cooked rusks, which we put in the milk of our cow. And so I did not have to cook suppers. What are rusks? Who knows what those are? they're biscuits. They're just biscuits that they put in milk to soften them up. Sometimes they're double cooked so that they don't spoil, but they're just biscuits. So that's what they live on, is like bread and milk for dinner. We were happy. We felt that we were going to a place of safety where we would not be molested by our enemies. We arrived at our destination in Salt Lake Valley, October 12, 1848, and were pleased to meet my brother Edward Stevenson. We lived in North Canyon 2 winters due to the timber and water. Here our third child, Mary Elizabeth, was born in November. Then on April 3, 1850, we moved into our log cabin in Farmington. So there's how she ended up here, as she and her family ended up in Farmington. Okay, now I'm going to shift and talk a little bit about Edward, her brother. Edward was probably, in all everyone's consideration, the most traveled missionary of the 1800s. This is a quote that we found from a historian in 1950. It seems no exaggeration to assert that Edward Stevenson traveled more miles at his own expense in preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ than any other elder of this dispensation. He crossed the plains 18 times during his lifetime and made 9 trips across the Atlantic Ocean. He was quite the missionary, and as he would travel from place to place on his different missions, different places, whenever he could, he would always stop by church history sites. And in fact, he was the one who, in later years, brought the church historian, the church photographer around to all these sites because he knew where they were, and they didn't, and they wanted to document them and record them. And so he did that years later. You've probably seen the picture of the Liberty Jail with someone on the roof. Edward's in that picture. That's who was taken on that trip. Oh, and these are kind of fun. These are some of one of his missionary calls. You see Brigham Young's signature there. Then later there's Wilford Woodruff's signature and John Taylor on a couple other of his calls. So it was, those are kind of fun documents. He was one of the first 7 presidents of 70, signed by George Smith. He was a prolific writer. He wrote 40 journals. He wrote his autobiography. And I think one of the most remarkable things was he wrote this book, Reminiscence of Joseph Smith, in the Book of Mormon. And then he had made up several huge, they were done on what we would be equivalent of those pull-down blinds that you have on the windows, those big things that you'd roll those up, those pictures. And he would go around and lecture about Joseph Smith in the Book of Mormon and show those pictures and the cutouts, and which are in the book. It's a pretty amazing testimony of the Book of Mormon and Joseph Smith. I just wanted to show a sample of his handwriting. This is his handwriting when he was age 70. So it's not, his handwriting is even better when he was younger, but he had great handwriting. It made it very easy to read all of these journals that he wrote. He wrote, 40 different volumes of journals. Okay, I already mentioned visiting church history sites. So let me share with you an experience with Martin Harris. So when Edward was coming back from one of his missions, he stopped at Kirtland, to see the Kirtland Temple, and out front of the Kirtland Temple, Martin Harris was there with a group of people, as he often did. He was living there, and he would share his testimony. Martin Harris would share his testimony of seeing the gold plates in the Book of Mormon. Because even though he left the church, he always stayed true to that testimony. Edward noticed him, went over to visit, and they chatted, and Edward added his testimony to that of Martin, to those who were listening. And they had a nice conversation with Martin. And essentially invited Martin to come to Utah. He said, yeah, you really ought to come. And Mark, because he'd never seen his grandchildren yet that were born in Utah. And so Martin seemed somewhat interested, and so he and Edward exchanged letters. Here's some of the letters. There's one sample of one of the letters that went back and forth between the two of them. And Martin said, yeah, I'll come. If you give me a round-trip ticket, I don't want to be stuck in Utah, I want a round-trip ticket, then I will come. And so Edward showed that letter to Brigham Young, and Brigham Young said, absolutely, raise the funds to do that. Here's the first $25, and pulled out of his pocket to contribute to that. Edward raised the rest of the money for those tickets, and they wrote to Martin and said, I'll be back there in a couple months, and pick you up and bring you back to Utah, where you'll have your round-trip ticket. When Edward got back there, Martin was ecstatic. He was so excited, which is so interesting. He was so excited to go, and he was telling his neighbors and his friends and all that. And he got his ticket, and off they went to on the way to Utah. Now, on the train, it's a little bit different back then than it is now. There weren't express trains. They would stop each night at each of these different towns. And so it took several days to come here, a week or two, I can't remember exactly how long. But each time they would stop, Edward would get Martin Harris up on the back of the train, which was by the platform, and all the people in those towns, they would come see the train. That was some of their entertainment. And he would have Martin give his testimony, and Edward would add his testimony, and all during the trip. Edward, being the missionary that was telling Martin that, he really ought to be rebaptized and teaching him all the truths of the gospel that he missed out on, like baptism for the dead, because he left the church before that was revealed. Well, long story short, after Martin came, he was excited to be with his family. He had a dream that he needed to be rebaptized. Went to see Edward and said, yep, I'm ready to be rebaptized. So they arranged that. Edward baptized him, and then he was confirmed by the leaders of the church at that time. So a great story. Then there's a picture of Nancy Rita Porter and the 4 oldest children. And so I just want to go over a little bit about the divorce situation with Mary and Nancy and Edward. They were divorced on the 3rd of July, 1869. There's been a lot of speculation as to what the cause of the divorce was. They never wrote down specifically what happened. They never talked about it. There's some theory. I read this in one of the books that the Clarks published. I was looking at it, that it was about some letters that Edward did during the courting years, because Ezra and Edward were rivals in wanting to marry Nancy back in Nauvoo. So they were rivals, and so there was some speculation as to maybe there was something that happened then that later caused the divorce. My dad did some interviews, essentially determined that that's not very likely. It was probably more likely that those rumors came from a time when Edward was asked to intervene in Nancy. She was interested in this, not a member of the church, crimes, to try to break that up, and so which he did, and she was grateful for later. That happened 3 years before Edward and Nancy were married. The only written evidence we have is a letter that Edward wrote to Brigham Young the day that Ezra T. and Nancy were sealed in the endowment house, 1870. Let me just read this section of it. There's some other things there. It says, whatever may occur, I have the consolation to know the great and grand cause of my family difficulty seated itself through this holy order of marriage, polygamy in other words. very soon after taking Elizabeth, my second living wife, Edward had several wives who had already passed away that he was sealed to, but this was the second living wife. Nancy's own sister-in-law told me that, he says other place in the letter, that she told him this after the divorce had happened. He was not aware of this during the marriage. Nancy's own sister-in-law told me that Nancy said to her that Elizabeth was getting between her and her husband, and it seemed as though she could not stand it. So, again, it's my opinion, just an opinion. Like I said, we have no evidence of what caused it, but the reality that my guess is that between all of the missions that Edward went on and living the law of polygamy, being with other wives, that Nancy felt neglected, and they were estranged for about 4 years before the divorce happened. The relationship was difficult, and so they received a divorce, and then a year later, Brigham Young said to Nancy and Edward they needed to get married, so that's what they did. So enough on that. Move on. So going up another generation, going to Joseph Stevenson and Elizabeth Stevens, just quickly. So as I mentioned, Joseph was a cooper, and because of that, he, back in those days, he didn't move around very much. And so, I mean, he was born in Leicestershire, but he ends up in London, which is where Elizabeth Stevens lives, and that's how they meet. But he's in London because he's being a cooper there for the Board of Ordnance. And then he is later stationed in Gibraltar. He marries at an older age. He was 24 when he married, which is very interesting to me. He later asked to be, after 11 years, asked to be transferred to Canada for mostly two reasons. His four oldest, they can't get apprenticeships there, and Gibraltar there's really nothing going on there other than military, and because his health was suffering because of the climate. They denied his request, and so he leaves the employ. He just said, okay, I'm out of here. So they hop on a ship and go to America, end up in New York, and we're in New York a couple of years, and there he gets some apprenticeships and has some apprentices that he's working with, and he was an amazing cooper. He was one of the best around, and so there were a lot of people who wanted to apprentice with him. And then later Elizabeth Pontiac, which was mentioned, and then he dies in 1832. Elizabeth Stevens, as was mentioned, she's in London. They had 7 children together. I think it's interesting to note, I mean, she was widowed at 44 and didn't marry. And she went through a lot as a widow for those next 40 years. It was pretty tough going through a lot of circumstances. But she still had a cheerful outlook on life. And then to end up here, we don't have a lot of information about, well, I guess the top one's missing on your screen. So there's Edward Stevenson, and then his father's Edward Stevenson, but in Leicestershire, they're all in Leicestershire there. But the Stevenson family is a great family that I'm proud and happy to belong to and be part of. And it's, like I said, it's an honor to have this connection with the Clarks. We love the Clarks and are grateful to be included. And I say